So hello and welcome to all. Thank you for joining us for the first of the Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society's online events for this year. My name is David Hornsby. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Pablo Benito and Stephen Hertenstein. And by way of background, Pablo is currently professor at the Department of Translation and Interpretation at the University of Murcia, Spain. Specializing in the study of Islamic thought and Sufism, Pablo has taught courses and contributed to conferences in many countries, and he has directed more than 30 international congresses. As an author, editor, and translator, Pablo Benito has published extensively on Ibn Arabi and the mystical tradition. He is the director of Mias Latina and director and editor of its journal, El Azufre Royo, the Red Sulphur. Stephen Hertenstein is editor-in-chief of the Journal of the Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society, is a Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society Senior Research Fellow, and the director of Anqa Publishing, an independent company that works in close collaboration with the Society. He works as an editor on Encyclopedia Islamica, teaches Sufism and Sufi poetry at the University of Oxford, and is globally known as a prolific author and translator.
Thank you very much, David, for your very kind remarks and introduction. And thank you also to the Society in general for hosting this online event. Those in the background who often are unseen, but they're essential to the whole workings of it. I also wanted to make a special thank you because this book, Patterns of Contemplation, which we're going to talk about, is the fruit of nearly 2 years' work between Pablo and myself, and would not have happened and come out in publication without the support and generosity of the Ibn Arabi Research Initiative at Monash University. And of course, thank you to all of you from around the world for your help, your support, your encouragement, and coming today. So in order to kind of begin this session, we thought that we would read a very small passage, but powerful passage from Ibn Arabi's Futuhat on the secrets of prayer. And then we will read the prayer itself, but just the beginning of it to give you a flavor. And then we'll have the questions and answers and discussion. So one of the reasons for beginning with this little extract from Ibn Arabi's writing is just to set the context for prayer in general, according to Ibn Arabi. And my thanks go to Francesco Chiabotti for pointing this particular passage out to us. This is from the beginning of chapter 69 in the Futuhat on the secrets of prayer. And because it's quite condensed, I'm going to read the first line and then just explain with interpolation a little bit, because otherwise it would be difficult to understand. So he begins, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Know, may God sustain you with the Holy Spirit, that what is called prayer can be linked to three. And he goes on to explain God, the angel, and the human being, and to the fourth of the three. And he explains this later by saying, everything other than God, in other words, all existent things. Prayer can be attached to God according to the all-inclusive meaning, which is mercy, since God qualified himself as all-merciful, Rahim. And he also qualified his servants as such in his word, the most merciful of the merciful ones. The messenger of God said, God will have mercy on those of his servants who are merciful. God also affirms in the Quran, it is he who prays over you. He qualifies himself as praying, that is, bestowing mercy upon you, so that he may bring you from darkness into light. The prayer of blessing for the messenger of God, blessing and peace be upon him, is a part of personal invocation. The messenger of God instructed us on how to pray for him, that is, how to make a personal invocation for him. So that's the end of the passage from the Futuhat. And what we will do now is just, we'll read in recitation the beginning of the Blessing Prayer of Effusion, just the first few couplets to give you a feel of the sound of it in Arabic and in translation. So, Pablo, whenever you're ready.
الصلاة الفيضية الكبرى على الحقيقة المحمدية العظمى. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
The Blessing Prayer of Divine Effusion upon the reality of Muhammad. In the name of God, the Compassionate, the Merciful.
اللهم أفض صلة صلواتك وسلامة تسليماتك.
O God, effuse the freely given bestowing of your blessing prayers and the health-giving security of your peace greetings.
على أول التعينات المفاضات من العماء الرباني وآخر التنسلات المضافات إلى النوع الإنساني.
Upon the first of the individuations overflowing from the lordly cloud, and the last of the revelations descending to the human species.
المهاجر من مكة كان الله ولم يكن معه شيء ثان إلى مدينة وهو الآن على ما عليه كان.
The emigrant from the Mecca of God is, and there is not a thing with him as second, to the Medina of he is now as he always is.
محصي عوالم الحضارات الخمس في وجوده وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين والراحم سائل استعداداتها بنداء جده وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين.
The recorder of the domains of the five presences within his being, and we have recorded everything in a clear leader, and the mercifier of those who ask for the actualizing of the numbered contents of these presences by calling upon his munificence, and we have only sent you as a mercy to the worlds.
نقطة البسملة الجامعة لما يكون وكان ونقطة الأمر الجولة بدوائر الأكوان.
The dot of the basmala that brings together all that is to be and has been, and the dot of the order that constantly circulates through the circles of created beings.
سر الهوية التي في كل شيء سارية وعن كل شيء مجردة وعارية.
The secret of the he-ness that permeates unseen into each thing and that remains utterly free from everything and naked. So there we have a flavor of this wonderful prayer.
Well, thank you very much thank you both for that profound and resonant reading. Stephen, I'd like to start by asking if you would explain what is meant by the blessing prayer on the Prophet Muhammad, and indeed, why is it an important type of prayer?
Not a simple question to start off with, but I suppose the first thing is, as I read at the beginning, in the context of prayer in general, that Ibn Arabi is very clear. There are about two things. First of all, that prayer is something that God himself does over us. So this is an existential reality. This is something which is going on whether we are aware of it or not. And the prayer over the Prophet Muhammad is God's prayer over, let us say, the reality of the human being. So this prayer, which is constant from the divine side over the human being, the real human being, when we ourselves come to recite or record a prayer for the Prophet, as we have been instructed to do, we are joining an already existing prayer. We're not trying to pray over the Prophet, because such a thing is actually impossible. We are simply joining and fulfilling a prayer which is ongoing. I think if one sees it like that, it becomes a very, very different matter. So this practice, which seems to have originated primarily as a kind of genre in the Maghreb, more or less at the time of Ibn Arabi, or coming up to the time of Ibn Arabi, it was taken on and it became a whole way of praise. So we have some very, very famous names who are involved in it. We've mentioned some of them in the book, and one of the things we put in the book was one of the first of this genre, which is the prayer on the Prophet by Aziz al-Mahdawi, who is the let's say mentor, friend, colleague of Ibn Arabi himself, who lived in Tunis, and who was a very important figure in the beginning of Ibn Arabi's journey. So that prayer is like a prototype in a way. And the prayer that we have before us here is something which is almost like we could say the culmination of the genre. It's the full flowering of its content, meaning, and how to go about it, if you like. So it's not a particularly well-known prayer. That's what's very curious. It is known through the commentary tradition, which happened later. But maybe, Pablo, you have more to say about the whole genre of salawat and why it's important as a practice, particularly when we consider it in relation to, let's say, the Christian tradition or the Jewish tradition, which don't really have any equivalent to this.
Precisely the emphasis that Islamic tradition gives to this whole frame of salawat, of blessing prayers upon the Prophet, is quite particular of Islam, and is especially developed as a very relevant practice within Sufism itself, as you say, from this Maghrebian origin, apparently starting with the Qadi Iyad, we are mentioning as well in his Kitab al-Shifa, we are mentioning in the book. Precisely is to him that Abdul Karim Jili would refer when writing on the attributes and the nature of the Prophet, of human being, represented by the figure of Muhammad. So all this atmosphere in between the Akbarians and the Shadilite tradition, very interesting departing idea of the gender from the Maghreb, and that later on we see expanded very much in Oriental lands, particularly among the Akbarian authors, as we are showing in the book, that was mainly commented upon by the prior. This prior in particular was mainly commented upon by big Akbarians, such as Abdul and Nabulusi. I wanted to add something in general about the Salat, because this idea of blessing prayer upon the Prophet is intimately connected by the same term, Salat, which is the practice of the mainly 5 daily prayers that are a practice of every Muslim. And so the term is the same. And every one of these daily prayers contains at the end the salawat, the blessing prayers upon the Prophet. So this is, let's say, a continuous reference. And yes, in Christianity, we see how, for example, in Mariology, the prayer upon Mary developed very much, and it's also a very frequent, significant prayer. But I think, as Steve was suggesting, we have nothing similar in the Jewish or Christian tradition to the continuous recurrence of this prayer upon the reality of Muhammad as we have in Sufism and Islam in general. So it's something to reflect upon. And certainly this culminating prayer, whose authority we attribute to Bosnevi, to Abdullah Bosnevi, we are quite convinced about it. We can discuss it later. Can be seen as a kind of culmination of this consciousness of the fact that, in fact, Salat is not just an occasional practice, but it's a way to understand the effusion of existence itself. So the title of the prayer, the Salat al-fayḍiyya, the Salat about the effusion, let us think that the effusion of existence itself is, from one point of view, God prayer upon the reality of Muhammad in existentiating being, and on the other hand is the prayer getting back from any place of manifestation towards the one who is ultimately the originator of all prayer. So as Ibn Arabi would say, that we are all ultimately guided towards the real, and that he would say that even if we are not speaking, we speak through our state, demanding constantly to the divine names to manifest according to the need we might have. So there is the language of the state. So we can consider the prayer to be a universal fact. Let's say that we cannot but be in prayer continuously, so that everything in existence in this effusion can be seen as the actualization of this original prayer on the reality of Muhammad.
Thank you both very much for those very comprehensive answers. Indeed, Patterns of Contemplation is a very complex and scholarly book. Can you give us a simple overview and summary, Pablo? Is it possible to do that?
Well, I tend to think it is not, because it is quite an overwhelming book. It developed in an organic manner. So I think Steve would agree to when I say that we didn't have at the beginning a clear conception of what it was going to happen. We didn't have an index, right? So we just wanted to work on this very beautiful, impressive text, and it was developing in directions in unexpected ways. So since it concerns as much an approach to the history of the gender itself, and then all this study of the commentaries on the meaning of every particular couplet. By studying what we later decided to approach as a kaleidoscopic structure, then we came to realize the importance of the science of letters and numbers, understood as from the point of view of the Hermetic Pythagorean Sufi tradition in a very wide sense. We came to realize the importance of that in order to approach the resonances, the rhythmic resonances of the text, its structure and its meanings. So it is also a book on the abjad system and the science of numbers itself. And we have been working for years, since Steve and me started collaborating, I think back to the 97, 98, something like that. We did produce a number of studies and translations where the idea of contemplating the presence of geometric patterns behind the text themselves as the support of the textual contemplation, and also trying to find the numbers concerning the structure and the meaning of the text. It has been a continuous, but really through this amazing prayer, we came to contemplate things that we have never seen before, and approaching them from perspectives that are quite fascinating to us, because it's a kind of discovery.
Can you just explain to us, actually, in simple terms, what the structure of the book is and its content?
Yes, very simply, there's a brief introduction which is quite general. Then there are 5 chapters which are really introductions to things that you need to know if you want to go into this prayer beyond the apparent form of it. I mean, to give you an example, the prayer itself is a series of couplets, rhyming couplets, each of which, so this rhyme is not necessarily repeated. It might be, let's say, A, B, B, C, C, A. It may repeat or it may not. But each couplet, when you look at the final rhyme of the couplet, we started to discover an extraordinary pattern, which is that at the end letter, the value of it was 5. So the basic structure of this prayer is, let's say, 5 and 5. So each couplet, first line, 5, second line, 5. Now that obviously gives a certain rhythm and pattern to it, but there are many meanings behind it. So 5 is an unusual number for many, many reasons. 5 is the only number that if you replicate it, you return to 1. You go through 10 and you come back to 1. So the centerpiece of this prayer in the book, we needed to explain something about the structure on one side, and we went into it. The more we went into it, the more there was that we were finding. So that appeared in a whole series of appendices on the abjad system, on on how the structure actually works, on the structure of the prayer itself, which is divided into 5, but can also be seen as each section is divided into 2, which means that it's got 10 parts, so it again returns to 1. So these were all ways in which one could approach the way that the prayer itself is constructed.
And within the book itself, you've got what? You've laid out the Arabic text, the translated text, the transliterated text.
We've done the Arabic text and an English translation on facing pages. Then there is also a transliteration for those who want to recite who don't have the Arabic. There's also a Spanish translation for those who prefer to read it in Spanish, like my friend Pablo, I'm sure would prefer to read it in Spanish sometimes. Then we also redid a whole commentary on each couplet, because there are technical terms in this prayer which derive from a whole, let's say, Akbarian consciousness. And they, on face value, they would be quite difficult to understand. Why is he using such an image? Some of the images are very graphic and very easy to understand. Some are more technical. And each of them needed explaining, plus, so we put a lot of that into the notes. So that's why the prayer kind of appears in two different ways in the book.
And can you tell us something about the author of the prayer?
Just as a complement to what has been said, so there are 5 introductory studies and then 5 appendices at the end, and also the resonance of the several simultaneous structures that allow us to approach the prayer in different ways, all of which are very consistent with the composition, is really astonishing. So quite an experience. We keep working in that field. As for the author, David, yes, this was from the very beginning when we start reading the prayer, we realized that according to our feeling of the text and in relation to the fact that the copies we know are only very late, only after Bosnevi, and the first one is in fact the commentary. The first one we find is the commentary done by Nabulusi himself. So based on the fact that the literary style and certain features of language and the text itself, despite of the fact that the whole prayer is fully Akbarian in all respects, these features let us feel that it is not, we consider it is not a text, but by Ibn Arabi himself as a direct author, but certainly a text inspired by his thought and teaching, and perhaps his own ruhaniya in a way. But we were very clear that the author was somebody else, isn't it, Steve?
Yes, and because I'd been working on Abdullah Bosnevi for some time, I recognized certain patterns, certain phrases that were very familiar to me. So what we wanted to try and show is, although the prayer is attributed to Ibn Arabi, like many works have been attributed to Ibn Arabi, not all of them are in his, or by him, or in his hand, or anything. And when we have late manuscripts only, we have to raise the question, who is the actual author? I mean, the physical actual author. It may be, as Pablo suggests, that the ruhaniya, the spirituality and spiritual barakah of Ibn Arabi himself has authored the prayer, one could say. That's perfectly possible. But at the same time, there is a hand in this world that does it. So from the point of view of history, let's say, we had to try and show who might have been the author. And it became clearer and clearer and clearer that Abdullah Bosnevi himself is the author. And this is for technical reasons of style, of content, and of an approach to, let's say, Akbarian teaching, which is quite unique. I mean, I don't think you could mistake this for anybody else. We know that it predates Nabulusi, who is 18th century. We know that Nabulusi himself hints that he got it from Anatolia. But there's no more to go on than that. And we've never found a copy earlier than Nabulusi's time.
And then, Steve, in addition, a very significant part of the work is the study of at least 7 main works by Bosnevi himself, who have not been studied before. So in a sense, the book also provides the first quite deep study on Bosnevi's writing, and we find the same features in his writings as we find in the prior. Not only terminology, but the whole and this approach to structure and many other things, a huge number of associations and interrelations that reflect, for us, a very clear authorship from Abdullah Bosnevi.
Can you just remind us the dates of Abdullah Bosnevi, and also where did you find the manuscript that you did the work from, or were there multiple manuscripts?
Abdullah Bosnevi, I think, died in 1642 or 4. I can't remember the exact date. So he's, let's say, majorly between his early 17th century. As for the manuscripts of the prayer, we've gone through probably about 20 different copies, most of which are not dated, but they appear to be quite late. Many of them appear only in the commentary by an-Nablusi or others like al-Baghdadi and so on. There are 4 or 5 major commentaries on the prayer itself that were produced in the 18th century and 19th century.
Thank you. Okay. So going back to Patterns of Contemplation, now published, there is a lot of technical material in the book on geometry, on letters, on numbers. Pablo, why do you think this is necessary? What made you put this in?
Well, we came to realize by rereading, getting back to Ibn Arabi's own writings on the letters, especially the chapter 2 in the Futuhat, on which we are currently working to keep going in this inspiring direction, that the numbers are for Ibn Arabi al-Miftah al-Awwal. So the way to understand the world as a Quran, so as a book of symbols to be deciphered, goes to this first instance of the symbolic languages, which are numbers themselves. So in a sense, this correlation of letters and language and numbers, sorry, is so present and is so conscious in every single expression of this prayer in particular, and in so many other Sufi texts, that we realize that there is a very important approach in letting consciousness open in what we call the art of contemplation. So it's not so much merely an analytical approach as much as an opening of to a kind of music, where all this interaction of letters being numbers and numbers becoming language and becoming the structure of let's say a musical poem of the text itself as a geometry. All this interaction of patterns provides an opening for the heart. Is thus what we mean by patterns of contemplation. The text is not just an analytical proposition to extract difference for an experience of differentiating meanings, but it is a poetical experience of resonance in many levels, and so we found out how important it seems to be in the conception of every phrase. So the structure of the text itself is suggested by the numbers appearing at the beginning of sentences. And to give you an example, Steve referred to the fact that in a couplet, 2 parts will end up in 5. But even in every sentence, in every one of the 2 sentences of the couplet, we have an inner rhyme being 5 and the final being 5. So this is a constant poetic resonance. It's rhythm, it's music. So it is through this book we learn for our own reading, how to approach the text as music and as a contemplation of patterns, and so that's how it is.
That's marvelous. Would you like to add anything to that, Stephen?
Well, just to reiterate, I think the what's fascinating is we tend to think of, you know, musical composition and let's say composition in words, or verbal composition, as quite different things. This is an area where they've actually come together, and to appreciate the music of the composition, the music of these words, it's not just a matter of hearing it recited. It's a matter of understanding these resonances, these 5/5 resonances, let's say, for as one example, or what does, you know, why is this letter being suddenly given prominence? What is its significance? We actually started in many ways through an understanding of the letter Nun, on which I gave a talk some time ago.
Yeah.
But that was the beginning, that was a kind of opening to realizing that this was not only letters and numbers, it was also geometry, because the Nun is a semicircle, and there's an invisible Nun, another semicircle, which is waiting for us to discover it, actually, in many ways. And then we started to realize that understanding is inherent in the writings of many Sufi masters, and most particularly in Bosnevi, who goes into this in quite some way, not necessarily explicitly, but when he does, for example, Pablo referred to the texts that we looked at, and we started to find that the patterns in the preface, in the rhyming prose of the preface, in the khutbah, all of them were highly significant. The numerical value of the rhyme suddenly was revealing meanings that you would not necessarily know were there, but as soon as you started to look, they became apparent. And I think that kind of ongoing sense of discovery, it's like beginning to appreciate a symphony in the same way. The more you understand how it's been put together, the more appreciation you have of the profundity of the music.
Mm. Well, that's wonderful. So, patterns of contemplation, as per the title. But I mean, Stephen, what would you say to the view that prayer is a simple devotional matter, matter between a person and their Lord? Does it really need to be so apparently complicated or Pythagorean? What do you feel about that?
Well, if we take the analogy of music, it's actually very similar. You could listen to Bach and appreciate it just as an auditory experience. But the more you listen, the more you understand, the deeper the experience becomes. So this is not really about knowing things about the subject. It's not really a kind of analytical tool for getting into it. No, this is a way of appreciating the deep structure and understanding of harmony and beauty in this world, which exists whether we're aware of it or not. I'll give you one example. It's very simple. There is no doubt that the Pythagoreanness of Ibn Arabi has not been kind of studied enough yet, but he was very well aware of certain things. So for most of us, it would be quite a discovery to realize that if you add the numbers 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 9, what you end up with as a total is 45. Now, why is that significant? Well, Ibn Arabi talks a great deal about 45 sciences, Adamic sciences. These are the sciences of the human being. Why 45? Was he not? I mean, clearly he was aware that this series of 1 to 9 creates this pattern. This is just one
example. The name of Adam equals
precisely. Yeah, precisely. So the name Adam, in its value, is 45 in the Abjad system. So these are knowledges which have kind of, let's say, they built upon one another. So in the Pythagorean world, the relation to Adam would not be there, but the knowledge of 1 to 9 making 45 was surely there. One can give other examples. I mentioned, 1 to 10, 1 to 9. If you were to put we did a table somewhere in the book. If you were to reverse them and put 9 to 1 underneath, so that 1 plus 9 is 10, 2 plus 8 is 10. There's only one number that replicates itself, and that's the 5. Only the 5 plus 5. 6 plus 4, they're different numbers. Only 5 and itself make 1. So this is very significant in terms of you could transfer this into the letter realm immediately, and certain letters are under that 5 column, and they have this same property of, let's say, duplication to arrive at 1. So you've got 2, but you actually have 1. And that kind of switch that is constantly going on with numbers gives value to the characteristics of the number, which any mathematician would know. They would know, for example, 6 is a perfect number, which is 1 plus 2 plus 3. It's also 2 times 3. These are known facts, as it were, scientific facts. However, they're not contemplative facts until you start to unpick the correlation between those facts and the world in which we live and being a human being. Now, these are the things that let's say, Sufi masters and all this Akbarian tradition have gone into. This is what they have used numbers for. They're not sort of something else.
Yes, so I mean, Pablo, would you say that in a way, because of these apparently complex, they are complex structures and they have a certain science with them, but that these prayers were put together in this way actually to make them accessible to all of humanity and to be as universal as possible?
Yes, in fact, to complement what has been said, and the way you presented more or less the same question before, is to say that on the one hand, we are exploring aspects of this musical complexity as if we were analyzing the partiture of Bach or Beethoven or whatever, but there is no need at all of this complexity for people to approach this prayer in a devotional, personal, intimate way. On the contrary, the text itself flows as a very natural prayer. Is not perceived as a complex intellectual thing, despite of the high conceptual level, but is really a prayer address to the heart and to be recited from the heart. And in that sense, it's like reality itself. Reality can be seen as a sample reality, or it can be seen in an infinite complexity of endless interactions. So it's just as a mirror of reality itself and a mirror of possibilities of the disclosure of consciousness and experience within as we get conscious of this prayer. As I was suggesting, we are always necessarily, in a sense, from one perspective, we are always praying. We could say even that there is nothing in existence but prayer as an actualization of the divine prayer itself. But from that perspective, when this or any other prayer is being used as a ritual practice, it is a way to encourage the opening of the fact that we get conscious of this existential fact, and that our consciousness expands through the tool that is the textual prayer itself, in order to get conscious of the universal prayer. And in that sense, it's a sample prayer, like a poem. In a poem, when people listen to a beautiful poem, they are not counting syllables, they are not conscious of the number of strophes or verses or this and that, but all these, the rhythm, the rhythm is really fundamental to communicate this flow, these patterns of contemplation that accompany the opening of the heart. That's the thing. So certainly people can just read the prayer without reading the whole book, but we believe that reading this kind of explanation can help us to get more conscious of the expand of the significance of this kind of conscious artistic creation of which is conscious prayer, conscious
Yes.
of the symbolic meanings. Yes.
I mean, indeed, you've said elsewhere that you consider this blessing prayer to be a masterpiece or a jewel, like a jewel comparable to the great mosque of Cordoba. Can you say more about this?
Yes, we were discussing that quite a lot, Steve and me, because as we were so fascinated by the prayer in all the dimensions that we were contemplating in it, we came to realize by analogy that it was in a different proportion as a mosque or a palace or an architectural conception. So we came to feel that particularly in Sufi Islamic art, the very small pieces like a jar, like something small, can have the vocation of being a cosmic, a total universal cosmic expression. So every piece of art aims to express the unity of the whole in many ways. And this, in that sense, this prayer itself is a really fine example of this inclusive vocation of through a short composition, we can contemplate all references, all main symbols, all main aspects, dimensions of existence. It's like a complex, organic, kaleidoscopic pattern, symbolizing consciously the whole complexity and unity of the universe. Would you say so, Steve?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to put it. And all I would add is something very simple. When, for example, if you, as an individual, you go into a great building and you stand in a space and it has an impact on you. So in the same way, I mean, if you, let's say, stand in the space of this prayer, it can have an impact on you. And I think that was our experience very much.
Exactly, as in the Alhambra, in the Alhambra or in Granada, you do not need to be knowledgeable about architecture or the techniques underlying the whole conception of buildings, but immediately you are affected and perceiving, you are immersed in all the symbolizations provided by the harmony of all the arts combined in the building, and this is this brings you immediately in the presence of meaning and receptivity. So yeah. Something like that is what we meant by the prayer being like a Hamra. Yes.
Yes, thank you. That's beautiful. Stephen, turning to the work of this book, again, can you say something about your approach to translation? It's been said that translation is a fine art of balancing the character of the original language and giving it new life in a fresh language. It must be very difficult to translate prayers like this. What is your approach?
Well, it's such a difficult question to answer in a way, because there's a lot to be said. There's a lot to be said about the collaborative translation. I think both of us have found huge benefit in collaborating on translation. So, and I'm always amazed by Pablo can correct my English quite easily these days, which is astonishing. So it's a part of the process of discovery is translation for me. approach the Arabic, and sometimes the lines just open themselves and start speaking, as it were. It's not always easy to fix on a translation. And sometimes a word may appear, one way in one context and another way in another context, and one has to be sensitive to the fact that it could be multiple meanings. So trying to find a way of making English malleable to this kind of kaleidoscopic meaning which is in the Arabic is very difficult. It's probably why we end up with so many notes, which I don't know, maybe some people feel are over the top or far too complicated. But the fact is, you can have a very simple word in Arabic, and it has a simple image at the base of it, but then it starts to kind of multiply in its meaning. I won't go into particular examples, but the word often used as an example would be ayn, which is so difficult to translate. Some people say essence, some people say potential, some people say essential reality, some people say I, some people say source. It contains all these kind of multiple meanings, but the question would be, in any context, what's the kind of author trying to develop as imagery? And we've tried in the translation of the prayer itself, which was quite tough at times, to find the particular imagery which was being kind of hinted at. It's not even necessarily obviously there, but he uses a certain word and you think, well, it's just a rhyming word, and then you think, no, it's not just a rhyming word, it's got a lot of meaning hidden within it. So we were always balancing these things. I don't know what Pablo's experience is. He's in multiple languages with this. So,
well, I wanted to ask. Yes, I mean, Borges, Jorge Luis Borges was credited with bringing Latin American literature out of academia and to a global audience, which is what you're doing here, is bringing this out to a global audience. And he once wrote that the original is unfaithful to the translation. Is that your view? What is your approach to translation, Pablo?
Yes, I think our translation now needs to be written in Arabic. No, you are very right. In fact, I think what is a very nice quote, but is a different orientation, this interesting way of thinking by Borges. In fact, what we try to emphasize is our consciousness that in an Aquarian text, what is called the ishtiqaq, which is the lexical derivation, that let us know what is the main original concrete image of a root, is very significant symbolically in the words, in the choice of words within the context of the Aquarian authors in particular. So on the one hand, we try a concrete translation, meaning that in contrast to a tendency towards abstraction, we try to find what is the image implied by the particular choice of a root, which would let us feel, for example, in the context of Ain, the fact that it means for example, the disk of the sun, or it means the whole of a source, or it means the round, the spheric eye. So the root of I and determination, etc., goes back in this symbolic consciousness to a circle. So we are always trying to be aware of the image provided by the root, which is a kind of, let's say, tentative of concrete translation, so that terms we would choose in English or Spanish would try to reproduce this concrete image in some respect. And on the other hand, we are also translated in consciousness of the numerical values, because sometimes those values also provide keys to the choice of this or the other possible translation. etc. So it's quite a complex process, but we try to keep it simple in the final result, easygoing, natural reading. Anyway, it's a translation here becomes a matter of contemplating. It's an experience of imagining possibilities. And here, the fact of working together is essential, because when you bring all these possibilities together as as relations, how they resonate in one another as we dialogue about possibilities is fundamental to see that to reach a reading where our receptivity complements and finds a common reception that goes to a common sense. So it's really a fascinating process.
Yes, thank you very much. A unique process of collaboration and translation.